वीडियो ऑन मत कर बाकी कर।
Okay, let us go to our subject. Now, yesterday we discussed basics of tax. Now, today we are going to start with the first technical topic. This is what we did yesterday. Yes, good evening, all. Let us start with our today's deliberation. Now, this is what we discussed yesterday, some basics of income tax. I had given you the steps in which you have to compute your income. While applying the income tax subject in any of your client's case, may it be filing of returns, may it be handling some show cause notices, you have to always follow these steps. If you follow these steps, I assure you that more than 90% cases, your application of the subject of the law would be precise and perfect. Now, besides this, we discussed the format in which the entire income tax computation is done. We first compute the incomes headwise. How to compute, that is what we are going to start in our coming sessions. Get gross total income. From this, you are allowed deductions under chapter 6A. These are the deductions which are allowed for making certain specified investment savings deposits. What is left is the taxable income. On this taxable income, you apply the tax rates to compute the amount of tax. From this amount of tax, you are given a benefit which is called as rebate. It is like a discount from tax allowed only to individuals. Then on net tax payable, you add surcharge and cess as applicable. You get your final tax liability. From this, you are again given a deduction, a discount, which is here called as relief. This relief is allowed in those cases wherever there is double taxation, wherever because of certain provisions of the law you end up paying unnecessarily high tax, then the law provides you relief from that. And then this is your final tax liability, which is discharged by one of the three ways. You paid by yourself in advance, that is during the year when you are earning income, you pay quarterly small amounts in quarterly installments, that is advance tax, or you pay at the end while filing your returns, that is what is called as self assessment tax. These are the two ways, advance tax and self assessment tax, where you discharge a liability by yourself. The third way is TDS TCS, where your tax is collected by somebody else, your tax is deducted from your receipts by somebody else, and on your behalf it is deposited with the government. So that is the third way of discharging your tax liability, where somebody else is collecting.
गोल गोल
Yeah, where somebody else is collecting the tax on your behalf or deducting it from your income and depositing it in your name. So this is how you discharge your tax liability. If you are late in discharging, if you cross the deadlines, then obviously interest is added under these sections. We are going to study all these provisions in the coming slides. Now, the Act details. Section 1 is title commencement scope. Section 4 is charging section, which says that you have to pay tax on total income. The income is of the previous year, but you are liable to pay tax in the assessment year at the rates given in the budget, and it is applicable to every person. Further, we discussed who is a person. All types of entities are covered in person except central and state government. So central and state government are not liable to income tax because they are not covered in the definition of person of income tax. However, they are liable to pay indirect taxes like customs, like GST, state excise, state VAT, wherever applicable. So government, central or state, is not liable to income tax, but it is liable to indirect taxes. Then assessment year is a period of 12 months commencing from 1st April, and previous year means the year immediately preceding the assessment year. So we discussed up to this point. Then we landed to the concept of income. The general rule is, what is income? all revenue receipts. So once a receipt is revenue, be assured that it will be income. Yes, it may be taxable or it may be exempt, because the government under section 10 has given certain areas of certain cases where the government does not want to charge tax, does not want to levy tax. So those are the cases which are termed as exemption, where even though you have earned income, even though your receipt is a revenue receipt, but you are not called upon to pay tax because they are covered in the exemption list. Fine. Now, besides this, in some cases, even non-revenue receipts are liable to tax, but all non-revenue receipts are not liable to tax. Only those receipts which are specifically mentioned in the definition of income. Only those non-revenue receipts like winnings, like gifts, these are only liable to tax because they are specifically included in the definition of income. Next. Now, some general pointers, some features of income. First, income is something which is regular, periodic from a definite source. Second, it may be in kind. Third, even if you earn something from illegal activities, that will be income and liable to tax. How you are showing it in your books, whether you are showing it as revenue, non-revenue, that will not alter the character. What actually is the character, that will decide whether it is income or not. Wherever there is a dispute on title, the income tax officer will proceed to collect tax from one of the persons, and after the court's judgment, it will be finally decided as to who is the person liable to pay tax. Personal gifts, we discussed. In three cases, gifts are treated as income. One, where firstly, employer is giving gifts to the employee, that is income. Second, where you are receiving gifts in relation to your business profession, that is income. And third, where you are receiving gifts exceeding 50,000 from an unrelated person, that is also treated as income. Besides this, surplus of mutual agency is not income, and whatever incomes are liable to tax, you have to round it up to multiple of 10 rupees. So whatever is your final income on which you are liable to pay tax, it will be rounded off to nearest 10 rupees. Similarly, whatever is a tax, the amount of tax is also rounded to nearest multiple of 10 rupees. So we completed up to this point yesterday. I still am open for any questions on any of the points that we discussed yesterday. If there are any, please feel free to ask before I land up with my today's topic. So I just pause for a minute. If you have any doubts relating to any of the points we discussed yesterday, please feel free to raise your doubts. Yes. Are there any doubts? No doubts? Can you please discuss due dates of audit and non-audit? Yeah, Deepak ji, we are having a proper session on discussion of due dates. But just to inform, since you have raised a question, now because of COVID, this year's due dates have been extended, deferred. But generally, the due dates for non-audit assessees is 31st of July, and for audit assessees, it is 30th of September. Fine, this is the general rule. However, because of COVID, this year's due dates have been deferred, and we just completed the due date on 15th of January. So that is how it is. I hope I have given you a basic answer. Detailed, we are going to discuss in the session which is dedicated to this subject. Yeah. Any other question? Yes. Is there any due date? Obviously, see, there are two due dates. One is the due date for submitting the report, the audit report, and the other is the due date to file returns. Now, for audit assessees, there are two different due dates. Up to the last year, the due date for submitting audit report and the income tax return was same. From this year, they have changed this. You first submit the audit report, you upload the audit report, and then within 1 month, you have to file the return. Now, the interesting part is why they did so, because once you upload the audit report, you get auto populated return. Auto populated means now your income tax return is already pre-filled. The software of the income tax department itself fills the details on the basis of the audit report, and then only if there are any changes which you feel are required, or if there is any additional data which was not covered in the audit report, that you will add it in your returns and you upload the return. So from this year itself, the government had delinked both the due dates, the due date of audit report and the due date of the return. This is for the audit assessees. For non-audit assessees, obviously there is only one date, that is of filing of returns. Yeah, but this has been deferred because of Acha, so sorry, you're talking about 2021. Fine, you can say as of now, this is what has been proposed, but we are not sure how it will happen, because I presume that after this experience of what is going on presently, government will see whether they want to continue 2 days or they want to have a single date. So that will get to know very soon in the budget. But as of now, you can say that yes, this is what is the case. Fine. Any other questions, people? Any other questions? No? Fine. So let us start with our today's first topic of discussion, that is residential status. Now, what is residential status? Every person has three status. One is your nationality, which is decided by birth. Other is citizenship, which is dependent on various conditions. And third, which is granted by the income tax law, that is your residential status. In very simple words, the place where you are staying in this year of which you are going to pay tax. So the year pertaining to which you have to compute your income, you have to calculate your tax. In that year, you are residing in which country? That is your residential status. In short, this is for individuals. Now, let us go to details of this particular topic. First question: what is the significance of residential status? The answer is simple. The significance of residential status is, first, whatever tax rates are applicable to you, that is a tax rates, the rate at which you have to pay tax, that depends upon your residential status, especially in case of individuals. Secondly, the deductions that we discuss in our format, that also varies according to resident and non-resident persons. Third, whether your income will include only Indian incomes or it will also include foreign incomes, this is also decided on the basis of your residential status. Now, from where do we land up with residential status, or why are we giving so much importance to residential status? For this, we have to first go step by step. The law says you have to pay tax on total income, and total income is defined as the total amount of income calculated in accordance with section 5. And then section 5, which decides the total income, which is called as your tax incidence, that is what all incomes would be included in your total income. This section 5 says that your income could be Indian or foreign, and what would be taxable to you, Indian income or foreign income or both, that depends on your residential status. So if, let us say, you are resident, you are liable to pay tax on your global income, so you have to pay tax on Indian income as well as foreign income both. But if you are a non-resident, you have to pay tax only on Indian income but not on foreign incomes. Now, this rule has a small exception. The exception is applicable to persons who are resident and they are not ordinarily resident. Now, for these category of assessees, they are liable to pay tax on all Indian incomes, and also they are liable to pay tax on two foreign incomes. So broadly, when we'll discuss the residential status, you'll come to know that as far as individuals are concerned, there are three types of residential status. One is they are resident and ordinary resident. Second, they are resident but not ordinarily resident. And third, they are non-resident. For resident and ordinarily, all incomes are taxable. So they have to pay tax on global income. For resident but not ordinarily resident, they have to pay tax on all Indian income and two foreign incomes, which we are going to discuss here. And for non-residents, they have to pay tax only on Indian incomes but not on foreign incomes. Now, what are those two foreign incomes on which RNR has to pay tax? First is, foreign income is the foreign business income where the business is controlled from India. And second, it is a foreign profession income where the profession was originally set up in India. So these are the two foreign incomes which a non, so not sorry, which a RNOR, that is a resident but not ordinarily resident, is required to pay tax. Besides these two foreign incomes, a resident but not ordinarily resident is required to pay tax only on Indian incomes, but not on any other foreign income. So if you are ROR, you have to pay tax on all incomes, all Indian, all foreign. If you are non-resident, you have to pay tax only on all Indian but no foreign income. And if you are RNOR, you have to pay tax on all Indian and these two foreign incomes. Now, deciding this, that is as to you are required to pay tax on what incomes, whether Indian or foreign, is called as tax incidence. And this tax incidence is directly linked with your residential status. So this is one of the significances or importances of the concept of residential status. So once we come to know that, okay, for deciding total, we have to check residential status. Now we land up to the computation of residential status, or what are the provisions for deciding residential status. So let us go to those provisions as to how residential status would be decided. Let us check. One second. I suppose my screen is not visible, correct? Or is it visible? Just a moment. I think there is some issue in sharing screen. Just give me a moment. Yeah, 1 second. I'm just trying to fix up the problem. Yeah, now it will be visible. Okay. So we discussed this as to what is the provision relating to tax incidence. Now for deciding tax incidence, you have to first decide your residential status. Now, how is residential status decided? For this, there are three categories of persons. First is individual, the other one is company, and the remaining ones. So broadly, I have classified all the persons into three broad categories for deciding residential status. One set of rules for individual, other set of rules for companies, and for remaining all persons, there is a whole complete different set of rules. Now, what are this? For individuals, your residential status is determined on the basis of the period of stay in India. So for how many days you are present in India during that year of which you are computing income, that decides your residential status. In the forthcoming slides, we are going to discuss all these in detail. Now for people other than individuals, the second category is companies. Now for companies, the law says if you are an Indian company, you are always resident. But if you are not an Indian company, that is if you are a foreign company, then you are resident if the poem is in India. What is the full form of poem? The place of your effective management. So the law says that if you are a foreign company, you will be treated as a resident in India if you are effectively managed from India. So even though you are a foreign company, but your board of directors or the decision making persons are residing in India, and from India they are managing you, that is the place of your effective management is in India, then you are treated as resident. So this is a simple rule for deciding residential status for companies given in section 6 clause 3, that Indian companies always resident, other than Indian, that is foreign companies, are resident if their poem is in India. Now for persons other than companies like HUF, partnership firm, LLP, AOP, BOI, AJP, for them the rule is same. What is the rule? They are resident if the management and control is in India wholly or partly. So if they are controlled or managed from India, whether completely or partly, they will be treated as resident. They will be treated as non-resident only when their management and control is wholly from outside India. So let us say, taking an example of a partnership firm, if you are working partners all are residing outside. Even though the firm is registered in India, the firm has business in India, which is managed by managers or employees, but all the working partners, the decision making partners are residing outside, then we will say that the entire control and management is outside the firm, even though registered in India will be treated as a non-resident. Other way around, let us say a firm which is registered outside India, but its managing partners, at least one of them, is in India. So we can say the control of that firm is partly from India. Or if all of its managing partners are from India, then we'll say that its entire control and management is from India. Then such a firm, even though registered outside, having its operation outside, will be treated as resident for the purpose of the act. So for persons other than individual and companies, for all these persons, the rule is if their control and management is wholly or partly from India, they are resident. If their management is wholly from outside India, then they are non-resident. I hope you got both these rules. Now we have to determine the residential status of individuals. And dear participants, if you all would have studied this particular rule earlier, let me tell you, we are going to go for a drive now, because the entire scheme, even though it is intact, but now there are many important changes brought into the determination of residential status of individuals. So let us proceed. Now, before that, since the residential status over here is determined on the basis of control and management, the question is, how do we determine where is the control and management? Deepak sir has asked a question, sir, what is the meaning of place of effective management? I gave you the example. See, what do you mean by effective? Effective means where in reality, in practical sense, the control or management is happening, and not only for name's sake it is happening. Like many times we see that the head of some organization, many times the head of the country is a person, but control, or we normally use the word remote control, is with somebody else. So that is what is the meaning of effective control. That who is the head for namesake, that is not important. Who is the prime minister for namesake, that is not important. Who is actually taking the decisions, that is the meaning of effective control and management. Fine. Now, proprietorship comes under which head? Okay, there is a question, interesting question. Out of these three categories, proprietorship will come under which head? It will definitely come under the individual category, because there is no difference between a proprietary firm and the proprietor. So you do not determine the residential status of the firm, because there is no firm different from the person himself. So you determine the residential status of individual, that by default becomes the residential status of the proprietary firm. Now, here the term uses control and management. So the question is, what is control and management? The answer is, control and management means it is situated at a place where the head and brain of the organization is. It refers to the de facto control and not only the right to control. Like how I was explaining for this word effective control, same logic is given over here, that even though I am prime minister for the name's sake, but if I am not having the rights to take decision, then control does not rest with me. The de facto control, the effective control is somewhere else. That is the place of control and management. And if that place is in India, you are resident. It is a place where the integral and strategic decisions regarding the management of entity is, and not only the day-to-day management activities. So what is further clarified about control is that control. Acha, somebody is saying that we are not able to see other chats. Dear participants, my request is that whenever you are putting a chat, please make it visible to everyone, so others can also understand the question, so that whenever I'm answering, the others would get a link as to what I'm referring to. Thank you, sir, for bringing this to notice. So it is a request to all participants, whenever you are putting a question in the chat box, please make it visible to all instead of a direct message to me. Fine. Now, yeah, so we are discussing this. So where is the control and management situated? It is a place where the head and brain of the organization is. It means the de facto control, that is the effective control place, and not only the namesake control place. And most important, control and management does not means the day-to-day management activities. It means the place where the integral and the key decisions are taken. See, for running an organization, you have to have some middle level management, you have to have some lower level management. That is not control and management. It is the top level management. So wherever the top level management is situated, wherever they sit and take decisions, that is the place of control and management. That is where the integral and strategic decisions are taken. Fine. Now, after you understand both these categories, now we'll launch to individual category. Now, before that, some special features about residential status. It has to be determined for every year separately, because your residential status can change every year depending upon where you are staying. Once an assessee is resident for a source of income, so once a person becomes or is treated as a resident for one source, he is deemed to be resident for all sources. In other words, what is tried to be clarified over here is that you do not determine residential status income wise, you determine it person wise. So once I am resident for all sources of income, whether it be salary or house property or business or capital. Next, it is different from the concept of nationality and citizenship, which is decided by constitution. Residential status is decided by the income tax law, and its application is also limited only to income tax law. Next, now for determining residential status, we have to count the number of days for which you were present in India. Now, while counting this, there is one question. The day on which you left India or the day on which you arrived into India, whether they have to be counted as present in India or they have to be counted as present outside India. For this, the law says if you are having exact hourly details, if you are having exact hourly details, then we will not count both the days as present in India. So the day when you left India will not be counted as present in India. The day you arrived in India will also not be counted as present in India. Rather, you will find out the hours for which you are present on these days in India. You'll add up the hours. If it becomes 24, you treat it as one day. However, if practically the exact time details are not available as to when you came to India or when you left India, then the law says the date of arrival and departure both are to be considered. That is, they are to be counted as present in India. So it is a conditional rule, because now when we are going to discuss the provisions, it depends upon the number of days you were present in India. So while counting the number of days, the question is what about the arrival date and the departure date? So for that, this clarification is provided. There is a point that, sir, point B is not clear. You are talking about this. Okay. See, I'll give you an example. My residential status, which we are going to study how it is determined, is counted on the basis of number of days of stay in India. And one of the conditions is that if I stay for more than 182 days in India, I will be treated as a resident. This is one of the conditions. Now, let us say I was staying in India for 182 days or more. So technically, my status is resident. However, if you find out my income source wise means one source is job, that is salary income, the other source is rental, which is house property income, the other source is business income, the other source is capital income, and the last source is other sources income. Now in this particular case, it may happen that, understand this point, it may happen that when you are checking the residential status, if you go source wise, maybe I may have started the business very late in India. So if you are seeing my business income, for the purpose of that business, my stay in India is less than 182 days, because out of my total stay in India, I started the business in the last part of my stay in India. Because of which, maybe if you count the number of days for which I was present in India to do business, let us say it comes to only 50 days. Now you will say, no, sir, you're not satisfying any conditions of residential status. So I will treat you as non-resident for the business income. But since your other incomes you are present for in India for more than 182 days, so that is why for other incomes you are resident, but for business income you are non-resident. Now logically, if you apply, you will get the answer yourself that this is not practically correct. How can I be treated as a resident for salary and house property but non-resident for business? So that is why the law clarified that we will not determine your residential status source wise. So we will not see that for business how many days you are present in India, or for salary how many days you are present in India. We will find out during the year how many days you were present in India total. And once your days cross the given criteria which we are going to study, you are resident. And once you are resident, it will be treated as a resident for all sources of income. We do not determine residential status for each income. We determine residential status for each person. That is what is the meaning. Exact time of arrival and departure, how or from which documents? See, generally it is your passport, it is a visa where it is stamped. Can be derived from passport stamping done only for the date of arrival or departure without time. Exactly. That is why the law says if there is no time details available, see, you may ask the airport authorities to even put the stamp showing the time. If they do so, then from the same passport, you will get the time details, which generally may not be followed in every country. That is why we are having a conditional answer, that if exact time details are available, then you calculate it differently. If not, which is generally the case, you are not having the exact time details,